Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Gil West, Chief Operating Officer, Cruise. Welcome to the podcast, Gil.
Thanks. Great to be here, Grayson. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to have you here because the name of the podcast is The Road to Autonomy and Cruise is on the road to commercialization. What does that road look like? The company's been releasing incredible videos. You had Mayor Brown recently in a car in San Francisco. You had Willie Mays to say, hey, kid, you're doing all these great things. I'm like, okay, Cruise is gearing up for something special here.
At a high level, we're making the pivot really from an R&D company to commercial operations. And it's a different gear to catch, if you will, in our roadmap. And the team's having a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of lessons learned. And we've got other models that, from other industries, candidly, that help guide us along the way. So we're having a lot of fun right now.
Fun's key. Customer service is another key. Operations are the glue that hold us together. And you come from a fascinating industry that is a lot of moving parts, a lot of logistics. It's moving people, but it's also highly rooted in customer service. You came out of Delta Airlines as the former chief operating officer there. You turned it around with Mr. Anderson and the team. Very impressive. And now you're at the autonomous vehicle industry. You're at the birth of a new industry. Talk about that journey, please.
Wow, it's great. Well, first of all, I think maybe just to come to the journey itself, the airline business, first of all, a really complex business. It was viewed, I think, from most people involved in it as a commoditized business. And I would just say, as part of that journey, it was really refocusing to make sure we had the right building blocks, and that's the right foundation. And it applies to autonomous, of having safe and reliable operations. To your point, everything is basically built off of that foundation. And if you're able to run great operations, it is a real springboard for the customer experience. So versus in poor operations, everybody spends their time apologizing and to some degree getting yelled at. But when you got great operations, it gives you a chance to really cement the customer experience and to make it personalized and memorable. So, and then ultimately you can differentiate yourself with that. Great ops, great customer experience. People are willing to pay a little bit more, and then that's the fuel for your business model. And that's in large part is, I think, the journey that we're undertaking now at Cruise.
At Delta, you put the right building blocks in place. I'll say Delta was ahead of other airlines. Frankly, they were ahead of a lot of companies in the S&P. You purchased an oil refinery, and they said, wait a second, back of house is very important. We have to have happy employees. You introduced an employee profit sharing and stock options. And then you said, wait a second, we need to increase our route map. Let's merge with Northwest Airlines. You're doing all these complex things. You're shoring up the employee base. You're shoring up your access to refined oil. How did you merge all these complex pieces together without losing focus on the customer expectations? Because as a Delta flyer during that time, your in-flight cabin experience only got better and better and better.
Oh, thanks. That's kind. Yeah. It was an interesting journey, right? Really from bankruptcy through consolidation, and then that whole phase where we took a bit of a bet to differentiate ourselves. Again, it was a mindset that everything was a commodity, and as a commodity, you manage cost. We said, no, we can differentiate ourselves in the eyes of our customer, and we can get paid for that. And that model really transformed the airline into the most profitable and valuable airline in history, literally. And it's a team sport, great team, but there was a discipline to that approach, right? Having the right goals, having the right focus, but then also the rigor to run the business. And then I would say an incentive system that aligned everybody. And to your point, the model was different there. We put our employees first, and then our employees took care of our customers, and then the customers took care of the shareholders and the business and the enterprise, and a bit of a virtuous circle there. So I think, that approach is just good practice for any business, really.
You come out of bankruptcy, become the most profitable airline in history. What were some of the early reactions from the analysts and saying, okay, how'd you do this?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a show me world with the analyst, I think, and some maybe more sophisticated, more in-depth followers of the industry, some not so much. So I think to some degree you got to live quarter to quarter, but you have to paint the vision and the narrative and show the proof points along the way. And I think over time, Delta was able to do that, right? I mean, the results ultimately spoke for themselves, the profitability, the cash flow. Probably the best metric it was employee profit sharing, where it topped billions of dollars a year, employee profit sharing, which was unprecedented for any company. So I think over time, you just got to drive the results to back up your vision. And that was the approach there.
You backed up your vision, you delivered for your employees, you delivered for Wall Street, you delivered for your customers, which were your passengers, and also let's not forget about the freight that you ship on those planes as well. Is that the same model at Cruise, where we're going to become a highly profitable company with extremely world-class customer service, where the passengers in the Cruise vehicle say, this was a great experience, the Cruise vehicle will be there on time, it will be clean, and it will be reliable, very similar to the airline industry?
Yeah, so I do think there's the same building block approach that I described earlier, right? Operational foundation, great customer experience. People want to use us, and that model applies in our space. I think we have another advantage in that, we have a purpose-built vehicle coming. So where to some degree, the airline business, you just kind of take what's out there. You can influence the OEMs to design your vehicle. In our world, we, of course, have a great partner with GM, and we've got a purpose-built vehicle called the Origin that is designed for the business verticals we want to enter. So that gives us an advantage in that, it's designed for utility and cost, but also the customer experience. So I think at the end of the day, we'll have a better product and a lower cost. So that can be really disruptive in our model.
Will the Origin be operated as a Boeing plane or an Airbus plane where it can go in for a set schedule of maintenance? You replace the seats, you replace the windows, you replace all the electrical, but then the core frame keeps going. Is that a very similar analogy?
Yeah, so it's a great analogy. In the airline world, you want to buy an aircraft and run it for 30, 40 years even, and that life of the asset's key to the economic model. The same applies for autonomous. So the life of that asset is a key input cost variable. And, again, with the Origin and GM's expertise really to design vehicles and design an industrial vehicle that can run, 1,000,000 miles, and really start with that design because it's built to last is key. Of course, to your point, you've got to maintain that as well. You just can't run it forever. You've got to maintain it to drive the reliability that you want, but also the customer experience that you want. So we know interiors will wear, technology will change so that, the cabin technology will continue to change over time. So our ability to kind of think of that more modularly so that we can swap things out over time, maintain them, keep the appearance up, but also the cost down at the same time and the reliability up is really key to the model.
Vehicles being designed to run 1,000,000 times, that's impressive into itself. And you mentioned cabin tech, and I'm going to go compare and contrast airlines throughout this conversation. If you look at seat backs, the IFE system, the in-flight entertainment, during a set period of time, let's say 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, airlines start to update those. Will that, as new technology comes online, let's say it's voice activation, or there's new screen technology, is that a very similar approach where Cruise will update the interior of the vehicle to meet the customer's expectations?
Yeah, I think ultimately the customer will lead us to this, right? And we've got the advantage of technology, and we'll have, I think you'll see, of course, we have already seatback tablets in place with our R&D vehicles. So as we launch the Origin, there'll be a user interface there, but also we have an app interface. Unlike the airlines, once you get on an aircraft, while I think the airlines obviously have developed connectivity to devices through Wi-Fi. The ability to really leverage your own personal device as part of the experience will be key too. So that journey from an app standpoint will also be a key attribute of the customer experience.
The key differentiator there is that your customers in the Cruise Origin vehicle, they can connect to a cellular network, to a 5G network. They don't have to connect to a KA or a KU, which are inconsistent and slow. So you get the whole debate. Well, I'm on the plane though, and the internet's not working in the cruise vehicle. That's not going to happen. That's a key advantage to operating a vehicle on city streets.
Exactly. Yeah, I dealt with a lot of Wi-Fi issues over my time, and it's good not to have that variable to have to manage, from a customer experience standpoint, because the ground cellular infrastructure is available.
With the cruise vehicle operating 1,000,000 miles, very impressive. At the end of its lifetime, when the engineers and the maintenance team say, okay, Gil, okay, cruise team, it's time to go out to pasture. Planes tend to go to the desert. I believe it's in Arizona, with the airplane graveyard. Do the origin vehicles with GM's and Cruise's commitment to sustainability, do they get recycled and enter the circular economy, or what does that look like for end of life?
Yeah, no, thanks. Well, certainly one of the elements of our mission is to save the planet, and sustainability is key to that. So, and I'll just say from an aircraft standpoint, it's very sad to go to Arizona and watch an airplane from the shape of an aircraft become just rubble, as they recycle those. But I think it is key, and I suspect, of course, we're nowhere close to that part of our journey at Cruise, but clearly we'll want to recycle the asset, right? And there's different pieces that there's the ability to salvage components, things like batteries or compute systems or sensors. And then there's also really the recycling of the rest of the vehicle. So for aluminum and steel. So there's clearly a process that does that for aircraft that makes sense. It'll make sense as well for our form factors at the end of their life.
And then you're reducing the company's carbon footprint, which is impressive. How much does the company lean on you with your airline background? Say, okay, Gil, pretend the origin's an aircraft. What do we do? Do you get a lot of those conversations sitting there having coffee and comparing and contrasting the airline fuselage to the origin vehicle?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's clearly different businesses, right? But I think, it's always helpful to look to other models in different industries, as guideposts. And I think there is quite a bit of overlap between aviation, airlines, and what we're doing. So it's one of the kind of proof points that we continue to look at, but there's others. And I think from a sustainability standpoint, we have a huge leg up, candidly, to the airlines, because we are able to go complete EV and clean power commitment on top of that right out of the gate. So it's not as though, our technology doesn't enable that. And then we've got a partner, GM, that's committed as well on the sustainability front. So that combination really gives us the ability to have a tremendous impact. And I mean, it's always interesting to look at the stats, and imagine them, Grayson, but for an average car, right? I mean, it emits 3 times the weight of the car in carbon dioxide annually, right? So, I mean, these are massive, massive machines, with internal combustion engines. And our ability to basically have an impact in that model, I think, is really important to our mission as a company.
I would say one of the strategic advantages of your partnership with GM is the Ultium battery. And that's GM's commitment very publicly about building the multiple factories. That's a huge competitive advantage there. But stepping back for a second, why did Cruise make the decision on day one to be all electric and reuse clean power?
Well, I think it basically comes down to our mission. And the way I've looked at our mission, there's really four elements to it. And I mean, the first one is to save lives. And we believe that we have that capability. 40,000 people a year die on highways annually, and we can help there, right? We've got the ability to drive safer than a human. It also saves people time. So there's a huge productivity boost, I think, associated with what we're trying to do. Saves people money because, we've designed a purpose-built vehicle that will be a cost saving for people, but ultimately saving the planet. So it really comes down to our mission, and to save the planet, EV is an enabler for that. So it's just a natural act. So as we've worked through our R&D vehicles, we've used the Chevrolet Bolt that's an EV. And then, as we move into our production vehicle, the Origin, it's an EV as well. So we've got that commitment. And we think, all autonomous companies, as we progress technology and really create a new mode of transportation, it would be a wasted opportunity not to move into EV at the same time.
It's smart to save money. Inflation's at a 40-year high, so that's a very positive statement, because if you can allow a single mother to go to a better job in a lower cost way, that's going to have a very positive impact on society. And then her children could possibly go to a better school. And that's something I think that's not talked about a lot. Or a child can go to a library or to a museum. You're going to open up all these possibilities around creativity and child's brains and just being explored and open to stuff where they couldn't necessarily get to that museum or to that school. And that's an advantage to AVs. That's going to be a powerful one.
Yeah. No, thanks for pointing that out. I think there's a number of different opportunities associated with that. The one that you mentioned is great. The cost savings piece, it basically enables people to take a transportation mode that otherwise may not be available to them in any form. But then there's also kind of an accessibility angle. I mean, my parents are in their 90s at this point, literally approaching their 90s. So if you think about their ability, I don't feel comfortable with them driving any longer. So this creates a whole nother mode of transportation for them that they can use easily. And then, my kids are older now, they're in their 20s, but I mean, gosh, when they were 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, I would love to have the ability to know that, there's a different mode of transportation other than me driving them around everywhere they want to go, right? So I think it opens up markets that otherwise we may not feel comfortable using, in the current transportation system. So we're really excited about that aspect too.
It's funny. So you were dad. I'm called Daddy Taxi. Okay, Daddy Taxi, let's go. So I am well aware of that. If putting this into context, I want to point this out. It was only 93 years ago. I repeat, 93 years that Delta operated their first flight. It seems like airlines and Delta have been flying since the beginning of time, but it was only 93 years ago. Comparing and contrasting this with the autonomous vehicle industry, we're just starting to barely scratch the surface. Delta's come an incredible way throughout 93 years. Where do you see the autonomous vehicle industry, and particularly cruise, evolving over the next 93 years?
Great question. Well, I mean, I do believe this is our Wright Brothers moment, in autonomous. I mean, it's happening before our eyes. So, and I'm not sure at the time the Wright brothers probably could have predicted where, aviation or the airlines would go, or even if there would be an airline, in their first few years. But I think the impact is going to be felt around the world of autonomous. So if you fast forward that, and I touched on it earlier, but I do believe we have the opportunity to save lives, save people time, save people money, save the planet. So all that effect, I think, will be felt. There's also, I think, the adoption of AVs will move from what now I think is viewed almost as science fiction to just a basic mode of transportation that we're all dependent and use. And then I think there's a couple of other aspects, that get talked about time from time that I think are important to note. One is just personal car ownership, right? Especially if you live in a city and you have accessibility, okay, maybe as a family, we don't need two cars. We can have one car. So I think personal car ownership, that model will morph over time. And, that's got far-reaching ramifications just in terms of footprint and how we use and how we park and all those other kind of infrastructure requirements. But I think the other big piece is I think autonomous will drive a massive productivity increase for society. And you just think about that it does save people time where you don't have to drive, and time is the productivity unlock. So, there's different ways to apply that value of time creation, but I think it's going to have a huge impact on society. Plus, as we talked about earlier, just the increased mobility for everybody, the old, the poor, others, I think it's just going to be an unlock for increased mobility.
It's going to be an unlock for increased mobility, but I think it's going to unlock economic pockets, which would be interesting. So for giving an example, I had a driver take me to Orlando. I gave a talk and I came home. I was relaxed. I didn't spend the night in Orlando. Perhaps you can go there, but I spent money when I was there. I had a dinner. That becomes really interesting. So the AV, you can go from, say, Orlando to Tampa, and you can go have dinner in Tampa and come back. Okay, so you had an economic plus in Tampa where you supported that restaurant. That becomes really interesting. We start diving into the economics of what this technology is going to unveil.
Exactly. No, I think that says it well. I mean, plus the other overlay on all this is there's a labor shortage. I mean, I talk to still a lot of different COOs and big companies, on a regular basis. And to a person, they can't get the labor they need to operate their businesses. So this is another opportunity from a productivity standpoint, to really help business and ultimately our whole country drive more productivity. And that'll manifest itself in different forms.
Autonomous vehicles are good for society. Autonomous vehicles are good for the economy. I mentioned inflation earlier at a 40-year high. Now that was in goods. Now inflation is starting to creep into the service sector. And if you can't hire in the service sector, you're going to have a very rough going of the U.S. economy. And autonomous vehicles will solve that problem. They'll allow people to move. They'll create really good, high-paying jobs. And the economic benefits, we'll sit here 20 years from now and Gil over coffee and say, remember when we said the economic benefits of autonomous vehicles? And sure enough, there'll be somebody on Bloomberg or CNBC and said, well, there's this little company called Cruise that's now a big company, and they were spot on right.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm old enough to remember the advent of personal computers. I hate to date myself, but it was kind of the same thing there. As people would look at it and go, what does this mean? What does it mean to me? Even my job. And then you realize it's a tool and it just drives additional productivity. And I think that's ultimately how autonomous will emerge. It just creates time advantages and productivity advantages that give us all another, leg up as society.
Could you imagine a world where the Wright Brothers didn't have that flight at Kitty Hawk? They didn't go to France to further scale the technology. They didn't have the home support system they had in Ohio, and we didn't have planes to the productivity where we would be today as a society. Our economy wouldn't be growing at the way it's growing if it wasn't for the advent of the airline industry.
Yeah, and I think the parallel certainly is applicable here as well. We're just, again, the early years, but I think as you fast forward, you'll see a tremendous impact that autonomous will have across the world.
And perhaps one day in the future, they'll say the same thing about autonomy. Airlines operate in multiple countries, multiple cities, some larger cities, regional, bigger ones. Same thing's going to happen with Cruise. You have an announcement. You're going to operate in Dubai. You've publicly pulled the driver in San Francisco. There's industry rumblings that Cruise will expand to multiple cities. I fully believe that. As Cruise expands and scales to multiple cities and multiple countries, will you follow the airline industry model and introduce a frequent rider program?
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny because as we think about scaling the business, I really think loyalty programs work. I lived them, saw the impact. And, I think they're particularly important in transportation systems, right? And travel in particular. So the airlines are probably the best example of that, but certainly hotels, other forms, all the same thing. So I'm sure over time there'll be a role of frequent rider programs, that will play out in our model too.
Well, you have somebody here that would be proud to be a beta tester for you and give you unbiased feedback.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. We love that.
How are you working with Kyle and the team to prepare to scale? Because it seems like Cruise is about to put on a rocket booster and go up to the moon.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have a great team, and Kyle, of course, we're really fortunate as a founder that he's still here as part of this journey and leading the company. So I think that's really helpful. But we're, again, making the pivot from R&D to commercial operations and getting ready to scale. It's a major focus of ours. So we're doing something that's never been done. So there's kind of that 0 to 1 moment. But then as we partnered with GM and we look down the road, we have to be able to operate large fleets and do that efficiently and provide the type of customer experience we've been talking about here today. So there's a number of things that we continue to focus on and refine. The technology, of course, is the foundation of that, but also how do we drive reliability of our vehicles? How do we have the right infrastructure that will scale for us, right? And that's a challenging problem to solve. How do we basically produce enough vehicles? We have the right processes and the right tools and the ability to operate large fleets. So as we're driving towards that, we're also very disciplined in our approach. And I think it's reflective probably of our approach to pivot into San Francisco to solve the toughest problem from a technology standpoint first, and then be very disciplined from an expansion standpoint. So we'll take that same approach and make sure that we're rigorous. So as we scale, while there'll always be lessons learned, we want to make sure that we're performing well along the way. So generally, that'll be our approach.
Disciplined expansion, looking at history of companies that have gone public and gone belly up, they can learn a lot from the statement of disciplined expansion. You have to do it right and strategically. You just can't say, I'm going to be in 100 cities tomorrow. It's never going to scale and it'll flop. So congratulations on that point. When you're looking to add, so you're in San Francisco, let's say you're going to add city number 2, for example. What does it look like from a logistical and operational standpoint? Do you have to get a depot? Do you have to do the mapping? What does that look like when, let's call it city number 2?
Yeah, all of the above. I mean, there's a kind of a checklist approach that we continue to develop and test and then apply. So as you mentioned, we've announced we're going to Dubai. So we look at that, and we need to plan accordingly. So the infrastructure is a big part of that, making sure that we have the footprint that we need, the ability to charge vehicles, launch vehicles, service vehicles, have the tools in place to manage fleets, and then optimize all the variables associated with the business. But then there's the technical side of mapping and making sure that we're able to operate safe and reliable. So there's the checklist that we know that we've got to ensure that we work through and do that. Some of those things have longer lead times than others. So we factor that into our calculus as well as we look to expand into a new city.
Using an airline analogy, you're building a maintenance hub where the cruise vehicles will go there to sleep, they'll go there to be updated. Is it kind of like you're building little mini airports everywhere you go?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a good analogy for sure. So you look at those models, there's basically the support, care, feeding, and everything of that nature that we have to do to ensure that we have a vehicle that'll continue to operate and drive the high utilization, that it needs. But at the same time, we take care of it so it's reliable. We manage the cost, with that eye so that we're not penny wise and pound foolish. And we think of it as a life cycle type cost approach. But then ultimately, all that we can deliver on the customer expectations that we'll want to deliver on.
You hit the nail on the head. Reliability. Without reliability and trust, this doesn't work. Your customer, the passengers, takes out their phone, says, okay, Origin will be here in 5 minutes. It has to show up within 5 minutes. It can't show up 25 minutes later. You know that from the airline industry. You see the metrics. Delta's on time is, I don't remember the metric. You know it better than me. But that's going to be a key metric. Is that something for Cruise that you'll publicly emphasize for the staff and the team there, that we have to make sure this is a reliable service?
Yeah. No, great question. And even though we're still in the early innings of our journey, we already have internal metrics around this, and the team's obsessed with it because, one, we know the importance. We're also all riders, so we're out using our product every day. So we understand the importance of reliability, and we're seeing, okay, what are the issues that are emerging? Let's work those. Let's Pareto them out. Let's attack them. Let's have the mindset that this never ends, right? This isn't just a destination. We will continue to drive and improve reliability, and then have the skills to do that, plus the science to do that. I think there again, the aviation industry has done a great job, kind of the science behind reliability analysis, maintenance programs to drive those outcomes. It's had 100 years to refine the model. So, we've studied those and can fast forward the application. But then we've also got an advantage, I think, with the data that we have coming off of our vehicles at Cruise, and not to mention the data science capabilities and machine learning capabilities that Cruise, just from our core technology development, has that can really leapfrog reliability, so that we see reliability problems coming and emerging, and we can deal with those before they ever have an effect on the vehicle itself by leveraging the data in a kind of more of a predictive maintenance type model. So I think as reliable as the airlines were, we have a chance actually to be even more reliable because of the data that we have and our ability to use it.
You said two things there. history is a great guide. Absolutely. We can learn so much from history. I'm a history book nerd, and you learn and you see all these patterns, especially things that are happening in monetary markets today. But another strategic advantage Cruise has, you have incredibly smart, talented engineers. I could imagine if you have a hackathon of some of the data that some of those really incredibly smart individuals on the Cruise team are building out things. Hey, Gil, check this out. We've got all these different metrics in this pinpoint, and we could pinpoint this down to the milli. That's got to be incredible.
I've never seen a more talented engineering team in the world in any industry, period. It's an amazing group of people, and they're passionate about what they're doing. Everybody at Cruise came here for the mission that I've talked about, but our capabilities are just unparalleled. Incredible leadership and engineering as well, that not only look and solve the problems we're faced with today, but just think structurally about how can we develop better tools to accelerate our learning and capabilities, and just look at the model and continue to look downstream and improve it. It's a real honor to be associated with that team, but then also really humbling because my engineering was mechanical engineering and principally around aerospace. And it's a league of technology. I think that it's hard for people that aren't associated with the industry to really get their heads around the capabilities that are here today and what's going on.
You're a strategic asset to Cruise. I'll say it again. You are an incredible strategic asset to Cruise. And you said this statement that resonated with me in a January 2021 statement to CNBC. You say the following: "There will be no bigger shift in the transportation industry in my lifetime than the move to self-driving. I've been training my entire career for an opportunity like this one." That's a big statement. Are you the Sherpa helping these younger individuals develop the business, scale the business, become a profitable business?
Well, thanks. Your description's kind. I think, first of all, it is a team sport at Cruise. I think everybody at Cruise really is part of the secret ingredients to do what we're doing. I think it's, for me at least, it's really historic, and I'm a kind of a transportation geek, always have been. And to be a part of this part of history, creating a new transportation mode is really cool. I think the impact that AVs are going to have, and we've talked about, is really unprecedented, but it's starting to happen now. I think that's the coolest part of it. So, my background, spent my career in transportation in one form, from originally at Boeing to airlines to running different companies, both aviation and ground transportation. So I think I've been fortunate to have a breadth of different experiences. And I think just that breadth of experiences, you've seen a lot of things, different models. Some work, some don't. There's a lot of painful lessons along the way. And to the degree that we can work together, and there's a lot of folks, similar backgrounds, as an example of what I've had coming from different industries, our ability to kind of fast forward what we're doing and not have to learn those painful lessons, through our experiences, but to learn from others. I think it just accelerates the model that we're trying to deploy right now.
And bringing this conversation full circle, your first job, you worked in your father's auto parts store. I mean, that's really cool. During that time, you're putting parts there, you're learning all about the automotive business. Did you ever imagine one day you'd be ushering in the future of ground transportation?
That's too funny. Yeah, I started my dad's auto parts store when I was about 6 years old. So I guess he didn't apply child labor laws at the time. But it's funny. I mean, and the type of things I were worried about was really just finding a set of headers for like a 69 Camaro Z28 or something. So no concept personally that there could even be, autonomous vehicles going forward. It was more science fiction, I think, in the world I lived in, than it would have been the thought that it could be reality. So I'm just so fortunate to be a part of it. Would have never, ever even dreamed that, be able to be a part of a company like Cruise that's truly making history and doing something that's never been done before.
You're playing an extremely critical role in the future. You're shaping it. I'd love to know, what would your father thought of electric and autonomous vehicles?
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, he wouldn't have believed it. I think the nature of running any small business, you're focused on what's at hand rather than what could be coming 30, 40, 50 years downstream. But even to this day, as I talk to him about it, I don't think he still believes it, to be honest. I think he's one of those things where, yeah, maybe that'll happen someday, but I don't know. This seems still like science fiction. Having said that, I think he's starting to see the proof points. So, and I think it's probably indicative of that generation, but maybe society as a whole is show me, right? And I think we're in the period of time now where we're starting to truly show people this is real. It has an application. It's hard, but it's a collection of talent that couldn't be better applied to what we're doing. And I think we'll quickly going to see that there is a real application and it's happening.
Show me is important. When you put an individual in the vehicle, you show them, they go from excited to okay to bored. It's like, okay, mission accomplished. The vehicle's doing its job. The passenger's having the experience. As more and more of the origin vehicles come online, your competitors' vehicles come online, new markets are going to be created. The transportation economy is going to completely change. How do you see the transportation economy changing as more forms of autonomy are introduced? And as you said, we show them to passengers and they enjoy them and they use them.
Yeah, well, I think Mary Barr talked about most recently at CES about different form factors for autonomous and even personal autonomous vehicles as part of that roadmap. So I think our technology could be applied, to a lot of different form factors. And then I think the use cases are almost endless. So as the technology emerges, the applications are plentiful, the impact will be tremendous. But again, we try to stay disciplined in our approach. So we've continued to think about that roadmap, plot the course for that, and execute, ensure that we continue to focus on the right things at the right time. But I'm really bullish as you fast forward this, where it's going and how it's going to impact the world around us.
As you stay focused on the right things, what's next for Cruise?
Yeah. First of all, one of our values is to stay focused, and we're very disciplined about that. So whether it's the way we plan, but also the way we execute, the way we prioritize, and as you would expect in the autonomous space, the opportunities can become almost a distraction. I mean, these are high-class problems, but at the same time, they're different markets, different applications, different partners. There's all this coming at you. And I think we really try to remain focused because we know we can't make progress unless we execute. So that disciplined approach in terms of planning, execution, again, has led us to the focus in San Francisco of solving the toughest technical problems first, and then the application of it now that we're deploying. I think all that really is a rigor that is difficult to maintain at times, but essential if we're going to move forward.
I can't wait to see what the future holds for Cruise. I believe it's a bright future. And Gil, thank you so much for coming on the Road to Autonomy today, sharing all these personal stories from the airline industry to where Cruise is going in the future. And as we look to wrap up, what would you like our listeners to take away with them?
Oh, wow. Well, thanks for that question, Grayson. Yeah. Well, first of all, we're living in truly historic times, and I do believe the AV will change our world in really positive ways. So I would just encourage you to go experience it, right? You're going to have opportunities here soon. And I think you'll equate it to your very first flight. You'll never forget it, right? Or I haven't at least. And I think the other thing that'll be amazing is within a span of just a few minutes, how quick it normalizes for you. And you realize, okay, wow, this is really important. And it's an experience that I can make a habit out of. And then you contrast that with kind of what other modes of transportation that are available, and you'll realize, wow, this is going to have a huge impact. So I think, our mission, we're committed to accomplishing. And I would just encourage you, Grayson, come out, let us put you in the car, right? So just shout when you're ready for a road trip.
You have a deal. Absolutely. I will come out and go for a ride in the Cruise vehicle. We are living in historic times. And to the listeners, if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, go for a ride, experience the future. Cruise is doing wonderful things. It's an incredible leadership team, incredible employees throughout the organization. Cruise is building the future because the future is bright The future is autonomous, and the future is cruise. Gil, thank you so much for coming on the Road to Autonomy today.
My pleasure, Grayson. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.